Shalom and welcome. This week's Torah portion, Shlach or Shlach Lecha, is really interesting. A lot of stuff here. The main thing that's in the Torah portion is the story of what's translated usually as spies. But if you read the story, it's not really, they can't really call them spies. It also contains, at the very end, the commandment about the fringes, wearing fringes on the corners of a garment, which is included in the daily prayer service as part of the Shema. And it talks about some sacrifices that everybody is supposed to do in the land, and it includes the stranger that may want to bring a sacrifice. And there's a little bitty story about some poor soul who was discovered gathering wood on the Sabbath, on Shabbos, and what happens to him. But I want to focus on this story of the spies. Moses is told by God to send people. And the way it's worded is send for yourself. It's like God saying to Moses, okay, you want to do it, do it. So they pick 10, 12 people, leaders of the tribes, and they're going to go and look over the promised land. Now, most translations say spies. I prefer explorers or possibly surveyors. Were we to send people today to do the same thing, it'd be a fact-finding mission. There's a whole bunch of people, possibly with pack animals and with some servants, so they're not going to spy. You say spy, we think of James Bond, but they're not going to be able to spy. They're going to be noticeable as they go around. And the word that's translated as spy can also be translated as explorer or surveyor. So I found that very interesting. So they go and they come back, and we all know this story. 10 of the 12 have a very poor and pessimistic view of what they saw. 2, Caleb and Joshua, come back and say, hey, they're strong people, some of them live from fortified time, but God will be with us, we'll have no problem here. It should be fine. Well, everybody starts listening to the other 10, and they don't believe that they can do that even with God. Moses and Aaron are hearing this, and they're going, and maybe they have a little premonition about what might happen here. Then we come to a little section again where we're going to have an interaction between Moses and God. And it could go something like this. God comes down in the tent of meeting, and he meets with Moses and Aaron, who are still going, what are we going to do with this people? And God says to them, what a bunch of evil people we've got here. They murmur against me. They make others murmur against me. I know what's going on. I've heard it. In spite of everything, in spite of all the things that I've done, it's God talking. Getting them out of Egypt, bringing them across the Sea of Reeds, bringing them to, drinkable water, providing food. Even their clothing isn't wearing out. They haven't noticed that yet, but that's happening too. If there are all these signs and wonders and miracles that have happened, now what happens? I tell you that there's no need to go scout out the land. You will have me with you and everything will work out fine. And they still insist. And so you go and you send, and they come back, and it's this, oh, I don't know what to do with this people. But you know what? I think I know what I'm going to do this time. I've had it. I really have. From the age of 20 years and up, you know, the ones we counted before, they're going to wander in this wilderness until they all die. And you know, the 10 that brought back this bad report, that gave this bad report, boy, have I got a plague for them. They're going to die of the plague right now. Or maybe better still, yeah, I'll kill off everybody, Moses, and I'll start off with you. And we'll build a new nation from you. Moses is listening to this and he's going, hey, this is the worst thing that I've heard. I don't know what can I say to God? I think I know. God, merciful God, compassionate God. Never hurts to spread around a little butter. Stop for a moment. Think about this. If you do this, what's going to happen? The Egyptians are going to hear about it. And what will the Egyptians say? The Egyptians will say, look, their God was strong enough to get them out of Egypt, but he only led them into the wilderness to kill them because he couldn't fulfill his promise to bring them to the land that he promised their forefathers. And what will happen next? The people who live in the promised land will hear what the Egyptians are saying, and they won't believe you have the power to do much of anything. So this is not going to be a good situation. So God has to think about what Moses is saying. And Moses goes on. You've forgiven these people for so much already. You are compassionate and merciful and forgiving. A little more grease here. What you can forgive again, even though you're strict and you enforce penalties and punishments against those that have sinned, you still forgive the innocent and the repentant. So once again, can't you see it in your wisdom to forgive this people? God is still thinking. So finally God says, in the Hebrew he says, Salachti kidvaracha. I have forgiven according to your way, to your word. But there still have to be a consequence here. So the whole people will go and wander in the desert for 40 years. 1 year for each day that they took exploring and surveying the land. That way, this generation that can't seem to get it together will all have passed, and it will be their children that will enter the land. Plus Caleb and Joshua, because at least they stood up for me. They had the faith. So at the end of the 40 years, their children will go into the land. So Moses was relieved. He left with Aaron, and they went and Moses told the people what the consequence would be. And then when they had to break camp to move on, they turned away from the promised land and set off into the wilderness. So it's interesting, that's how it might have happened. But even more interesting is from this Torah portion, there's one line that was taken, and it was put into the High Holy Day services, particularly on Yom Kippur. And that line is, Vayomer Adonai salachti kidvarecha, which means, and God said, I have pardoned or forgiven according to your word. It follows a request that God forgive us for our sins. Comes out of this Torah portion. So that's the story for this week. Thank you, and shalom.